The city of Los Angeles didn't sleep, just flickered. Neon signs buzzed faintly as their lights reflected in puddles left by a brief, forgotten rain. Steam rose from subway grates like the breath of a weary beast. The streets near Pershing Square had thinned. It was past midnight, the hour when laughter faded and shadows whispered louder. Keanu Reeves walked alone. No entourage, no cameras, just a dark jacket, worn boots, and a tired soul. The night had wrapped around him like an old coat, familiar, a little heavy. Filming had gone late. The scenes had been intense, emotionally draining. But the weight on his shoulders wasn't from the role. It was something else, something quiet. He walked not to be seen, but to disappear a little, to let the city's silence soak into him. As he turned onto Fifth Street, a soft gust of wind tugged at the edge of his coat. Across the road, under a flickering street lamp, he noticed someone. An old man sat on a bench alone, still eyes alert. Not slumped, not asleep, just watching. Keanu slowed down. Most people passed the man without looking. Some stepped further away, tightening their coats as if poverty might be contagious. But Keanu's eyes stayed on him. The man was thin, his gray hair curled slightly under a dark beanie. He wore layers, some torn, some stitched with care. Beside him sat a canvas bag, faded and patched. But what struck Keanu most wasn't the bag or the man's clothes. It was his posture, upright, deliberate, like a soldier at ease. Not at rest. There was no sign asking for help, no outstretched hand. Just eyes that followed movement with quiet calculation. Like he had seen it all before and was just waiting for the next moment to pass, Keanu stopped at the edge of the sidewalk. For a second, he considered walking on. Maybe this wasn't his business. Maybe he was overthinking. But something about that man didn't let him go. He crossed the street slowly, careful not to seem intrusive. His footsteps echoed softly against the concrete. As he approached, the man turned his head slightly. "Good evening," Keanu said gently, voice calm, respectful. The man studied him with unreadable eyes, sharp, clear, not the eyes of someone defeated. "Evening," the man replied. His voice was gravel and iron-tired but composed. Keanu reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a wrapped sandwich from the nearby deli. "I was walking by. Thought you might want something to eat." The man looked at the sandwich, then at Keanu. He didn't reach for it right away. Finally, he nodded once, slowly, and took the meal. Not with desperation, not even with gratitude. Just quiet acceptance. "Thank you," he said after a pause, but his tone didn't match the words. It was polite but guarded. Keanu nodded and stood there for a moment. He didn't walk away. He couldn't. Something about the man's presence unsettled him. Not in fear, but in curiosity. The stillness, the calm. It's the way he held himself like he'd seen war, and walked through it without needing to tell anyone. "Mind if I sit?" Keanu asked. The man looked at him for a long moment. Then, with a slight gesture of his hand, motioned to the other side of the bench. Keanu sat quietly. Neither of them spoke for a while. In the distance, a siren wailed and faded, and under the soft neon glow, men one world famous. The other invisible to most sat in silence, just breathing, just existing. And so the story began. The city's hum softened behind them as they walked side by side. Keanu didn't say much. He didn't need to. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was the kind of silence that made space, not tension. Frank, the older man, moved slowly but with intention. He didn't shuffle or drag his feet like someone broken. Every step felt chosen. They reached the corner diner. It was the kind of place with buzzing yellow lights, plastic booths, and the smell of burnt coffee soaked into the walls. Two men sat in the back, arguing quietly over a game of cards. A waitress with tired eyes glanced up as Keanu and Frank walked in. "Just pick any table," she said. They took a booth near the window. Keanu let Frank sit first, kept his bag with him, placing it gently at his side like it carried something precious. He didn't let it touch the floor. Keanu noticed that. He also noticed the way Frank's eyes scanned the room, not in fear, but in habit. Gasolating exits, identifying threats, mapping the space like a soldier would. You can order anything. You want? Keanu said softly as he slid the menu over. Frank picked it up slowly, as if he hadn't held a menu in years. He didn't even look at the prices. Just a sandwich and coffee, he said. Simple's fine. Keanu smiled. Shh. But we go a little beyond simple tonight. Frank raised an eyebrow. Not suspicious, just curious. They ended up ordering eggs, hash browns, toast, pancakes, and 2 coffees. Frank's hands were rough and cracked, but steady. When the food arrived, he didn't devour it, ate with quiet manners, each bite deliberate, like he was remembering how to eat without rushing. They ate in silence for a while. Then Keanu leaned forward. What's your name? He asked. Frank, he said. Frank Williams. Keanu nodded. I'm Keanu. Frank gave a slight glance, like the name rang a bell but not enough to place it. He didn't ask for last names. Didn't ask for occupation, it felt. Honest. You always sit at that bench? Keanu asked. Frank gave a small shrug. Only when the spot's open. Some nights the streets get loud. That corner's quiet. Safer. You been out here long? Frank sipped his coffee. His eyes stared through the window. Long enough. Keanu didn't press. Instead, he glanced down at the bag again. Up close, he could now see the worn fabric was dark green, almost gray. Stitched across one side was a faded name tag, barely readable. Williams. F. And beneath it, an old American flag patch, frayed at the edges. There were brass buttons on the side pocket. Military buttons, and a flash of something, purple. For a second, Keanu saw it. The edge of a velvet case tucked inside the bag. He recognized it. He'd seen one like it before. A purple heart case. His breath caught, but he said nothing. Instead, he leaned back. You were in the military? Frank's jaw stiffened. His eyes narrowed not in anger, but in memory. Yes, he said quietly. Vietnam. 72. Keanu nodded. My uncle served there. Never talked about it. Most of us didn't, Frank said, voice suddenly low. We were told we were heroes. Came home to be called monsters. They threw things at us in airports, spit on us in uniforms, took the medals, but gave us no peace. Keanu said nothing. He just listened. I was 18 when I shipped out, Frank continued. Thought I was fighting for freedom. Came back fighting for sleep. His voice cracked on that last word, but he recovered quickly. You still carry it. With you, Keanu said, glancing once more at the bag. Frank instinctively pulled it closer. This, he tapped the canvas. This holds the only parts of me that didn't disappear. Keanu didn't ask to see what was inside. He didn't need to. You're different, Frank said suddenly, looking straight at him. Keanu tilted his head. How so? Most people avoid me, even when they help. Don't sit down, they don't ask questions. They drop off food like they're tossing scraps to a dog. But you sat, you listened. Keanu offered a small smile. You didn't. Look like someone who needed scraps. Frank stared at him, and for a moment something softened in his face. Not a smile. Not yet. But something warmer than before? Then his voice dropped into a whisper. So quiet Keanu almost missed it. You saw the medal, didn't you? Keanu paused. Just a corner. Frank exhaled slowly. No one sees that. Not unless they're looking for it. You earned that, Keanu said. Frank shook his head. I earned pain. The medal was just paperwork. The nightmares, the loneliness. That was the real reward. The waitress came by with the check. Keanu paid without a word. Frank didn't even reach for his pockets. As they stepped out into the night again, the city's hum returned. Keanu walked him back to the bench. The same posture. But now something was different. Can I see you again? Keanu asked. Frank looked at him, long and deep. Why? He asked softly. Keanu didn't hesitate. Because your story matters. Frank didn't answer. Not with words. He just nodded. A little slower this time. A little less guarded. And Keanu, you're new. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The wind was different tonight. Not stronger, but colder. The kind of cold that didn't come from weather, came from memory. Keanu returned to 5th Street with 2 coffees in hand. Walking slower this time. He wasn't just there to visit. He felt like he was being drawn back, like something unfinished waited for him under that flickering street lamp. Frank was already there. Same bench. Same posture. Same bag, but tonight, his eyes were not scanning the street. They were locked on the horizon on nothing. On everything, Keanu approached silently and offered the coffee. Frank blinked as if pulled out of a fog. I figured you might be back, he said. You figured right, Keanu replied. He sat beside him. They sipped coffee in silence. Cars passed. A dog barked somewhere in the distance. A plastic bag danced in the gutter like a forgotten ghost. You ever think about the jungle? Keanu asked gently. Frank didn't answer at first. His fingers tightened slightly around the paper cup. Every night, he finally said. And every morning when I wake up, I'm surprised I'm not still there. Keanu nodded. What was it like? Frank exhaled slowly. Then he began. Loud, he said. Too loud? The jungle screams at you. Birds, bugs, branches, bullets. Always something breaking the silence. And when it wasn't loud, it was worse. Silence meant they were close. Keanu stayed still. I was stationed near La Drong Valley. Raycon, 18 years old. Didn't know how to shave properly. First night. Out there, my friend Mendez tripped a wire. Didn't even see it. Lost his leg before he could scream. Just like that, my childhood ended. He looked down at his coffee. I held him while he bled. Said things that didn't make sense. Sang part of a Beach Boys song to keep him calm. Did he make it? Keanu asked softly. No, Frank said. None of them did. The street lamp above flickered again. For a moment it buzzed so loud it felt like static in Keanu's bones. I lost 19 men in 2 years, Frank continued. Saw things I'll never say out loud. Smelled death more than I smelled fresh air. He paused, staring into the coffee. Cup like it might carry all the things he couldn't speak. And when I came home, Frank whispered, there were no parades. No welcome signs. Just cold eyes. A man spit on me in the airport. Called me a murderer. Keanu looked at him. I'm sorry. Don't be, Frank said. You didn't do it. But we'd let you be forgotten, Keanu said. That's worse. Frank didn't respond right away. Instead, he reached slowly into his bag and pulled out a photo, black and white, frayed at the edges. 7 young men in jungle fatigues stood shoulder to shoulder, smiling. One of them, Frank, stood in the middle, clean-shaven, eyes full of something that had no name. This is all I have left of them, he said. Keanu took the photo gently. You were the squad leader. They called me Ghost, Frank said, because I could move without making a sound. Keanu gave the photo back. Frank returned it to the bag like it was glass. I've tried to forget, Frank admitted. Tried everything: booze, isolation, even church. But the jungle's still in me. The mud, the blood, the silence, it lives inside. Keanu spoke softly. So why keep the Purple Heart if the memories hurt that much? Frank's hands paused. His fingers hovered near the zipper. Then, for the first time, he unzipped the front flap and showed it a velvet case. He opened it. Inside, the metal gleamed under the streetlight. A heart of purple and gold. Below it, a yellowing letter folded carefully, edges stained by time. Because this isn't for me, Frank said. It's for the boys who didn't come back. Keanu swallowed hard. You carry their weight. He said, Someone has to, Frank replied. They sat there as the city rolled by. People moved around them like water around a rock. No one stopped. No one looked. No one knew what was happening on that bench. But something was happening. Keanu reached into his pocket and pulled out a small notepad. He scribbled something on a paper, folded it, and handed it to Frank. What's this? Frank asked. An address, Keanu said. A center for veterans. Good people. Real support. Frank didn't unfold it, just stared at it. You think I'm worth saving? He asked. Keanu looked him dead in the eye. You already saved people. This time, Let someone save you. Frank's eyes glistened, but no tears fell. I'll think about it, he whispered. Keanu stood up. I'll be here tomorrow night, he said. Same time. Frank nodded. Keanu walked away into the night, and behind him, under the buzz of a broken light, Frank clutched the Purple Heart in one hand and the folded paper in the other. The following night, the sky above Los Angeles was thick with clouds. It hadn't rained yet, but the smell of it clung to the air like a warning. Keanu Reeves returned to the bench. He carried no food this time, only a jacket draped over one arm, and a quiet sense of urgency in his step. The city's noise felt sharper tonight, more impatient. Sirens pulsed from several blocks away. The wind had teeth now. Frank wasn't on the bench. Stomach sank. He stood still, scanning the shadows. Maybe Frank had moved. Maybe someone had claimed the spot. Maybe then movement across the street near a boarded-up storefront. Frank stood with his back against the wall, hunched, his bag clutched tight, staring down at something no one else could see. Keanu crossed over. Frank, he said gently. The old man didn't move at first. Then he looked up. His eyes were red. Not from crying. This was something else. Exhaustion. Torment. Like he hadn't slept in days. You came, he muttered. I said I would. Frank's voice was low and raw. I didn't sleep last night. Keanu waited. Kept dreaming I was back there, Frank whispered. In the jungle. Surrounded. Couldn't move. Couldn't scream. Keanu stepped closer. Nightmares, always, Frank said. Sometimes I'm 19 again. Other times, I'm 40, drunk, in a motel bathtub with a pistol in my lap. But it's always the same feeling, the shame. He sat down on the sidewalk suddenly, like his legs just gave out. Keanu sat next to him. Frank buried his face in his hands. You think a shelter's gonna fix this? He asked, voice muffled. Some hot food and a warm bed? No, Keanu said. But it's a start. Frank pulled his hands away, revealing eyes that weren't angry but hollow. Had a wife once, he said. Keanu blinked. What happened? I came home from the war with a body, but no soul, Frank said. She stayed for 6 years. God bless her. But I scared her. I'd scream in my sleep. Break things without meaning to. Flinch when the phone rang. He looked at the pavement. I ruined birthdays. Christmas. Everything. Keanu stayed quiet. My son was for the last time he hugged me, Frank whispered. After that, he stopped calling me Daddy, started calling me Frank. Keanu exhaled slowly. Do you know where they are now? Somewhere better, Frank said. That's all I know. For a while, neither man spoke. Then Keanu stood and extended a hand. Come with me, he said. Frank didn't move. Why? He asked. Because the past already broke you, Keanu said. But you're still standing, and that means something. Frank looked up. You don't know what it's like. You're right, Keanu admitted. I don't, but I know what it's like to feel lost, to need someone to remind you who you really are. Frank's hands trembled as he took the offered hand. Keanu helped him to his feet. They walked 3 blocks to a small, clean motel. Keanu had rented a room, no questions asked. Inside, the space was plain but warm. Clean sheets. Working heater. A chair by the window. Frank stood in the doorway like a man at the edge of a cliff. I don't belong here, said. Yes, you do, Keanu replied. Frank dropped the bag on the floor. You keep that thing close, Keanu said. What's in it, besides the medal and photos? Frank hesitated. Then he knelt and slowly opened the bag. Inside were a folded American flag. Worn but clean, a dog tag wrapped in cloth, a small stained Bible, a hand-drawn birthday card with childish handwriting. Happy birthday, Daddy, love. Max. Keanu knelt beside him. Frank didn't speak. Tears ran down his cheeks now, quiet and steady. I've never shown anyone this, he said. Keanu placed a hand gently on his shoulder. You don't have to be invisible anymore. Suddenly, Frank looked at him with fear in his eyes, not of Keanu, but of the idea of hope. What if I try, ... and still fail? Keanu answered without hesitation. Then we try again, together. Long silence followed. Frank nodded. He wiped his face, stood, looked around the room once more. Can I stay here tonight? For as long as you need, Keanu said. That night, Frank slept on a real bed for the first time in 3 years. He didn't dream of the jungle. He didn't wake up screaming. For the first time in decades, Frank Williams simply slept. And outside the motel window, the city sighed. Not in grief, but in relief. 3 days had passed since Frank last saw the bench. And in those 3 days, something inside him had begun to shift. Not fully, not cleanly, but enough to feel unfamiliar. The bed was soft. It was too soft at first. Sleep came in short bursts. Sounds of the motel, the elevator bell, the hum of the vending machines would wake him, but it wasn't the same kind of waking. There were no screaming fits, no hallucinations, no cold sweats. Just ... restlessness and something else. The fear of peace. He'd lived so long in survival mode that stillness felt like betrayal. Keanu had visited each morning, not with pity, never with pity. He brought coffee, breakfast, and light conversation. Sometimes they talked about books, sometimes music, sometimes nothing at all. On the 4th morning, Keanu arrived with something different. A folder. What's that? Frank asked, already suspicious. Options, Keanu said. They were seated in the motel room. Sunlight pushed through the half-closed blinds in golden streaks. Frank was sitting upright in the chair by the window, holding his coffee. Like it was a weapon against the unknown, Keanu opened the folder and laid it flat on the table. Inside were forms, pamphlets, and a printed intake letter for a trauma recovery program at a private veterans clinic, completely anonymous. It's fully covered. They specialize in PTSD, Keanu said quietly, and they don't judge. Most of the staff are veterans. Themselves. Frank's jaw tightened. You just expect me to walk in there? Let strangers pick through my head? I expect nothing, Keanu replied. I'm just opening a door. Frank looked away, silent. For a long time, neither man spoke. Then, without looking at Keanu, Frank said, Why are you doing this? Keanu leaned back, his voice steady. Because I saw something that night on the bench. The way you sat, the way you carried your bag like it still meant something. It does, Frank snapped. Because it's the only part of me I haven't lost. Keanu nodded. No. Then he reached into his own jacket and pulled out a small black box. Not velvet, not fancy, just simple and matte. What's that? Frank asked cautiously. Keanu set it gently on the table between them. Open it, he said. Frank stared at him, then at the box. After a pause, he reached out and flipped the lid. Inside was a carefully framed photograph. It showed a younger Keanu clean-cut, wearing a dark suit, shaking hands with a man in uniform. The photo was signed, To Our Quiet Warriors. In respect, Keanu Reeves. Beneath it was a handwritten note. The men who served deserved more. Then thanks, they deserve remembrance. Frank looked up, eyes narrowing. So you're... who, exactly? Keanu offered a calm smile. I'm an actor, he said. Keanu Reeves. I've done some films. Maybe you've seen them. Frank blinked, stunned, then gave a short, breathy laugh. You're that Keanu? Depends on who you ask. Frank shook his head. You're telling me? You've been sitting on a sidewalk with me, night after night, and never said a word about who you are? Didn't matter, Keanu said. I wasn't there as an actor. I was there as a man who saw another man fighting a battle no one else saw. Frank leaned back. He looked away. His voice, when it came, was barely a whisper. I don't deserve this. Keanu's expression didn't change. You're wrong. I've done things, Frank said. It's things I've buried. You were at war, Keanu replied. You were 18, and you came back to a country that turned its back on you. The things you did, the things you saw, they don't make you unworthy. They make you human. Frank's eyes welled up. He turned away, ashamed. Was it drunk? I abandoned my kid. I stole to survive. I've begged, I've lied. I've slept in alleyways. And you think one good conversation is enough to fix that? Keanu stood. His voice was calm but commanding. No. One conversation won't fix anything, but it can start something. He stepped closer and placed a hand on Frank's shoulder. You're not a problem to be solved. You're a story still being written. That afternoon, Keanu drove Frank to the clinic. The building was quiet, with tall glass windows and a garden at the entrance. No sirens, no buzzers. Just the sound of birds and the distant hum of wind chimes. Frank walked in slowly. He paused at the door. Keanu stood beside him. You sure about this? Frank asked. I'm sure you can do this, Keanu said. Frank took a deep breath, stepped inside, and disappeared down the hall with a counselor waiting for him. Keanu stayed outside. He didn't follow. He didn't need to. That night, for the first time in years, Frank didn't sleep on a bench, or in a motel, or with one eye open. He slept in a clean bed, in a warm room. Under his own name, and somewhere between the hum of the heater and the stillness of a silent mind, he began to believe. Maybe he wasn't broken after all. The walls were white. Not the kind of white that feels sterile, but the kind that lets the past rest. Frank had been at the Los Angeles, a veterans recovery center, for 3 weeks. 3 weeks since the bench. 3 weeks since the motel. 3 weeks. Since he last held his nightmares like they were his only inheritance, he still had them, of course. The dreams didn't stop, not entirely. Some nights he woke up sweating, his heart pounding like a distant gunfight still echoed in his chest. But now, he wasn't alone when he woke. Someone always checked on him, a counselor, a nurse, a fellow veteran down the hall. His world had gone from concrete and cold benches to warmth, routine, and structure. It felt strange, alien even, but it was real and it was working. Transformation wasn't loud. It was silent, slow, sacred. He started shaving again, eating real meals, speaking in full sentences without waiting for someone to dismiss him at first. Frank had stayed quiet during the group therapy sessions. He sat at the edge of the circle, arms crossed, the bag still at his feet like a shield. It's the same old bag, the one that held his war, his failure, his identity. But then one afternoon, a younger vet, barely 30, spoke about being forgotten, about how people thanked him in airports and pretended he didn't exist when he asked for work. Frank had cleared his throat, and for the first time in decades, spoke in front of others, not out of need, but out of purpose. It never really ends, he had said. But it does get quieter, and you don't have to be alone in the noise. The room went silent, and for the first time, Frank felt like someone again. Keanu had visited only twice in those weeks. He didn't want to overwhelm Frank. He understood that healing wasn't something you could rush, like a movie shoot. It had to breathe. But each time he came, he brought something: quiet, fresh coffee, a book of poetry. Once even a hand-carved chess set. He never stayed long, just enough to remind Frank he was still watching, still believing. On the 24th day, Frank was called to the courtyard after his morning session. The sun was out, rare for a city so often wrapped in haze. The sky felt open, limitless. Keanu stood beside a small table beneath the garden arbor, dressed simply in jeans and a black shirt. On the table, a wooden box, no locks, no decorations, just clean, polished oak. Frank approached slowly. What's this? He asked. Keanu smiled gently. A step. Frank looked down. His fingers traced the edge of the box, then carefully opened the lid. Inside, resting in velvet, was his purple heart medal, but no longer loose or tucked in shame. It had been framed, mounted, in a black wood panel with gold trim, and below it, engraved on a small brass plaque, were the words, "Heroism never fades. It waits." Frank's lips parted. He blinked once, twice, then reached out and touched the metal knot with shaking hands. But steady ones. Keanu stepped forward and handed him something else: a set of keys, looped on a silver ring. Frank stared. What's this? He whispered. A new place, Keanu said. Small apartment, clean, near the Veterans Association. It's already paid up for a year. Frank looked at the keys, then back at the box, then at Keanu. Why do you keep doing this? He asked. You already gave me everything. Keanu's reply was simple. You gave me something first. What? Truth, Keanu said. And a reminder of what courage really looks like. Later that evening, Frank stood in his new apartment. The walls were bare, a mattress on the floor, kitchen with real utensils. It's a hot shower. He stood. In the middle of the living room, holding the framed medal against his chest. His old bag now empty of secrets sat in the corner, and for the first time in decades, Frank hung something on a wall not to decorate, but to honor. The next morning, he walked into the local Veterans Association office for the first time in years. Not as someone asking for help, but someone ready to give it. He placed the photo of his old unit on the front desk. These were my brothers, he said to the man behind the counter. I think there's more out there who still need us. Who are you? The man asked. Frank looked him in the eye, stood tall, and said quietly, I'm Frank Williams. Vietnam, 70. 272, Purple Heart. And I'm here to help. Frank stood at the mirror. He adjusted the collar of his clean shirt, the first button-up he'd worn in over a decade. His hands moved slowly, not from age, but from disbelief. He stared at his reflection for a long time. There were still lines around his eyes. His hair was still gray, but something had changed. The weight was different now. He was no longer carrying shame. He was carrying legacy. It had been 6 months since Keanu first offered him a sandwich under that flickering streetlight on 5th Street. 6 months since Frank dared to sit in a diner and speak the word Vietnam aloud without flinching. 6 months since he unfolded the paper with the veteran clinic's address and walked toward a door that didn't close behind him, but opened everything ahead. In that time, Frank had not only found a home, he had found a mission at the Veterans Association. Frank now volunteered daily. His mornings were filled with paperwork and phone calls. His afternoons were for sitting with men like him, men with stories sealed behind silence. He was patient with them, never pressed. Just sat, listened, waited. He never forced anyone to speak. He knew too well what it cost to open your mouth and drag old ghost into the light. He told his story only when asked, but when he did, when he mentioned the photo, the jungle, the fear, the guilt, and then the bench, it always ended the same way. Keanu didn't save me, he'd say. He just reminded me who I was. One day, the association president called Frank into his office. We've got something for you, the man said with a sly grin. Frank frowned. What do you mean? Just be here Saturday. 4 p.m., dress nice? Frank hated surprises, but he respected the man enough not to argue. That Saturday, Keanu pulled up in a black pickup truck. He stepped out wearing a suit, nothing flashy, just respectful. He held a small gift bag in one hand. Frank walked outside and froze. What's all this? He asked. Keanu grinned. Come find out. They drove across town in silence. Not awkward, just peaceful. Then they turned onto a street Frank hadn't walked in months, 5th Street. The bench, except tonight. It wasn't empty. A small crowd had gathered under string lights, lanterns, and a clean white canopy set up beside the bench. Underneath it stood 6 elderly men, all dressed in modest suits. Some wore medals, some held canes. Frank recognized them instantly. His knees almost gave out. No, he whispered. No way. This way, Keanu said, gently steadying him. We found them. The last time Frank had seen those faces, they were covered in mud, sweat, and blood. Young, scared, half broken, standing beside him in the jungle, not knowing if morning would come. Now they stood straight, tears in their eyes, arms open. Ghost. One of them called out. You old son of a Frank didn't let him finish? He walked forward, eyes full, breath shaking, and fell into their embrace. They held him tight for a long time. No words. Just wait. Just memory. Just forgiveness. A small podium had been set. Up nearby, someone called Frank forward. He didn't want to speak, but they insisted. Keanu stood beside him. Frank stepped up to the mic. He cleared his throat, voice rough. I don't have a speech, he began. The crowd chuckled softly. I spent most of my life thinking the world forgot me. I thought being homeless was my punishment, that I'd failed my country, my family, myself. I paused, but then someone sat down beside me, not to give me money, not to feel better about themselves, but to look me in the eye and say, your story matters. He looked at Keanu, and he wouldn't let me forget it. Applause broke out. Some veterans in the crowd saluted. Frank blinked away tears. If you're out there, he said, and you think your life is over, I'm here to tell you, it's not. You're not broken, you're buried, and it's time to dig yourself out. After the crowd began to thin, Keanu handed Frank the small gift bag. Inside was a framed photo of the original bench. Etched into the frame were the words, "This is where the fight began again." Frank held it for a long time, then turned to Keanu. You said you didn't save me, Frank said. But you did. Keanu shook his head. No, I just brought a match. You lit the fire. They sat on the bench, same spot, but nothing about them was the same. The streetlight above them had been replaced, no more flickering. Just steady light, casting long shadows over to men who had, in different ways, saved each other. You still visit often? Frank asked. Keanu smiled. Always. They sat in silence. No war stories. No medals. Just presence. Epilogue: Frank Williams now leads a homeless veteran outreach program in Los Angeles. He has helped over 200 men and women reconnect with services, shelter, and identity. His story has been shared across the country, but he never accepts personal credit. His Purple Heart remains mounted on his apartment wall, next to the photo of the bench, and every year, on the anniversary of their first meeting, Keanu shows up with 2 coffees and a quiet smile. They sit, they talk, and sometimes they say nothing at all, because some battles are fought in silence, and some heroes sit quietly under a streetlight, reminding others that hope is still alive.